Welcome to Cybersecurity Workshops. In this session, we're going to talk about finding files and directories. So we're continuing with our introduction to the command line interface. This is a course authored by Matt Vogel at Tidewater Community College. And here in Module 2, we're covering lots of relatively brief topics around files and directories. And so we've talked about the file system, we've talked about moving around the file system, listing files, creating files, removing files, talked about file permissions, copying files, and now we're going to talk about finding files. So once you've got this relatively full home directory with a bunch of stuff in it, sometimes it's gets a little bit overwhelming and you have to be able to find stuff, right? And in Windows, we often do that using File Explorer. So you open up your File Explorer, and then in the upper right-hand corner you can search for stuff, and of course the Linux command line offers tools to find files as well. And not only can you find files in your own home directory, but you can find files across the whole file system. And so we'll look at how we find things that we're looking for from the Linux command line, and we'll look at a couple of different approaches to doing that. So we'll dive right in, finding files and directories. So we're going to look at 3 commands over the next 10 minutes or so. We're going to look at the find command, and pretty straightforward. It finds things. And I'm going to show you a couple of sort of quick and easy techniques that I often use with the find command. But it's pretty powerful, and we'll look at some of the more powerful options that you can use with that command also. And then the locate command is simpler, generally simpler to use than the find command, but there are some limitations around it, and we'll talk about some of those limitations. It often is going to do exactly what you need, but sometimes you need the more powerful find functionality. And then we'll take a look at the which command, and that helps us determine which version of a particular thing we're accessing, and that will make a little bit more sense when we get there. So those are the 3 commands that we're going to look at today. So we'll start with the find command, used to find files and directories in the Linux file system. And the basic syntax is this. You say find, and then you have to, so what you might want to do, you see something like this and you think, oh, I'll just put find and then the file name. And it'd be great if it worked like that. It doesn't work like that. So find when we get to locate, we'll see that you can do that kind of thing with locate, but find is a little bit more complicated. And so with find, we have to specify the starting directory. And sometimes the starting directory is the current directory that I'm in. And so, for example, I might want to say find, and then I could use my home directory, for example, and then a slash, or just my home directory. And that's going to search, and if we remember from the file tree, we have the root directory, and then we have home, and we have etc, and we have bin, and we have user. So there's a bunch of different subdirectories, and then under home, we have each of the user directories. So the one that we use most often is our student directory. So if I'm in student directory and I say find things, so if I say find tilde, that's the starting directory. That's going to search for things under the student directory. So subdirectories under student. So when we say the starting directory, we mean the root of the search. So I could do a search from root, and I often want to do that. Sometimes I'll say find. If I'm like looking for a file and I have no idea where it exists in the file system, I might just say find slash, and then dash name, and then the name of the file. So starting directory means the root from which your search is gonna execute. And I can, if I'm just somewhere at random in the file system and I know that the file is somewhere underneath where I am, then I can say find, and I can use the dot, and that means find, and the root of my search is the current directory. Remember, a single dot means current directory. And then I can say dash name, and then name of the file. So that's the format for the find command. And so here's an example. Find command is used to find the file. He's looking for a file named my new file in the current user's home directory. So we start with the tilde slash. I'm not sure if we have to use the slash there or not. We're going to try that here in a minute. The sudo command is used to ensure all the subdirectories are searched. So if you do a search and say I'm searching from the root of the file system, for example, and we're going to take a look at this in a minute, but if I search from the root of the file system, there's a whole bunch of directories underneath, or in various parts of the file system that are owned by root. And we're going to see that if I search and I don't use sudo to get into those directories that are owned by root, then I'm going to get a bunch of clutter in my results, and it's going to be hard to read my results. The reason I get a bunch of clutter is because I'm going to get a bunch of access denied errors when I'm trying to search those subdirectories. So we'll see that here in a minute. But that's what he means when he says we have to use the sudo command to ensure all the subdirectories are searched. And then the output is the absolute path of every file located. So it's going to give, so here we see the absolute path, right? /home/student, my new file. /home/student, my new dir, my new file. And every existent, every time, every copy of that file is going to be discovered. So here we see my new file, and it's finding different copies of it in different directories. So let's take a look here. So I'm in my home directory. So I might say, for example, find in the root of the search is the current directory. So I'm going to say dot dash name file 1. So there's no file 1 anywhere in my, so I got no results, right? So there's no file named file 1 underneath my home directory. So what might I find in there? Okay, there's a file 3. So I searched for file 3. Again, I'm searching. I happen to be in my home directory, but I'm searching it from the current directory down, and so I would get this same result if I said find tilde dash name file 3. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So so when I searched starting in the current directory, it didn't give me it does not give me the full path to the file. It gives me from the current directory /my directory file 3. That's interesting. So that's a little bit different than the slide that we just saw. So the results looks like are not always given in that absolute path format, but you should be able to you should recognize here that current directory /my directory file 3, that's the file, and then this is the same file, right? Home student my directory file 3. I could also do this. I could say find /, so remember I'm starting, I want my search to start in the root of the file system. Find /dash name file 3. What happens when I do that? Okay, so when I do that, I get a bunch of permission denied errors, right? Because a bunch of permission denied errors. So, and that took a while. So it searched starting in the root of the file system, and it searched through the entire file system, and that takes a long time. And also, you see that I did this, the search gives me a bunch of garbage, or it gives me a bunch of clutter because I'm not searching as root, and I'm not allowed to go into all these different subdirectories. Now you'll see, so here's all the clutter that I got, right? A bunch of garbage because I'm not allowed in there. Now it did find what I'm looking for, so it just, in what I'm looking for, just happened to show up in the last screen of all this clutter, /home/student /my directory file 3, right? So I did end up finding what I was looking for, but the output is kind of messy. But if I did this, if I said sudo find starting in root, dash name, file 3. Much less clutter, right? There's still a folder that root has got some permission issues with, and that has to do with the fact that we're running in a virtual environment here. But bottom line is my output was much less cluttered. There's only one directory that root couldn't get into, and I found what I was looking for very quickly. Okay, so that's the basic use of the find command. Find command. So there are some interesting options I can use with the find command. There's the iname option. So iname is gonna search for things in a case insensitive way. So it ignores case. So for example, I might say find, starting in my home directory, dash iname, my directory. Is that a thing? Yeah, sure it is. Okay. So I search now. If I did that same thing, watch if I do that same thing. Tilde dash name my directory. So this is kind of an important notion here to keep in mind. Linux is case sensitive in almost everything it does. Unlike Windows or Microsoft operating systems, which are generally not case sensitive, Linux is case sensitive in everything it does. So when I do a search, I'm gonna clear this and do that again so it's more obvious. I'm gonna say find, starting in my home directory, dash name my directory. Make sure I spell it right. Directory, my directory. Nothing found, right? If I do the same thing, but I ignore case, I found something, right? So I found this thing called my directory. And so when I searched, when I did a regular search, I didn't find it because, again, Linux is case sensitive. And so I could have in a folder, you know, we mentioned last time when we talked about files and directories, you said that you can't have the two files with the same name in the same directory. I guess that's a little bit of a misnomer. You could have files of the same name, but if you had different case of the letters in the name. So for example, I could make directory called my directory here, my directory. Now, if I did that same find again, ignoring case, I'm going to find two directories that seemingly have the same name, but the names are not the same because this one is a capital D and this one is a lowercase d, and those are different. So as far as Linux is concerned, those are different directories. It can uniquely identify them because there's a character that's different, so those are different directories. So the iname command is the case insensitive version of the search. It ignores case. Some other command options that I'm not going to, I mean, we'll look at some pictures here. I'm not going to go into it in the command line. You can look for stuff that was created recently, search for files and directories that have recently been modified within a specified number of minutes. The user option can search files or directories based on the owner using the file. Okay, so who's the owner of the file? The size option, so you can look for large files or very small files. The type option, you can say I only want to find files or directories. So here's some examples. Here's iname, we already looked at that. mmin used with dash number. So here I say sudo find, starting my home directory, dash mmin -5, and then the name. So I want to search for files that have been modified within less time of the specified number of minutes. So within 5 minutes or less. And in this example, we also give a file name, but you don't necessarily have to find a file name. If you're looking for all files that were created within the last 30 minutes, for example, so let's do that over here. So I'm going to say find tilde dash m min minus 30 minutes. Look at that. So a bunch of files were created in the last 30 minutes. Ones that I created in the last 30 minutes are home student, my directory file 3, my directory, another directory. So I created all this stuff before I started this discussion, so I could find some other stuff, file names and such. And this home student, my directory, I just created that while I was doing this session. This other stuff are other files that are automatically created by the system, and you see their dots files, so those are all hidden files. So remember, we talked earlier about the when a file is preceded by a dot, that means it's a hidden file. So normally, if you're just listing directories, you wouldn't see all those dot files, but here in the find command is going to spit all that stuff out. Okay, so that's the -m min command. You can use it to find files that are younger than a certain time period or older than a certain time period. You can find files that are owned by particular users. So I could look for stuff only, owned by root or only owned by user, vice versa. I could find files of various sizes. So if I were to use the -size option with 0C, that would find files that have 0 bytes, so empty files. So if I did a find starting my home directory -size and then 0C, there's some empty files in here. Again, some of this stuff is in hidden directories, but there's this thing called file 5, right? So if I said ls-al home student, my directory, another directory, there's file 5, and we see that file 5 is an empty file. Remember, the number here is the number of bytes in the file. File 5 is empty. I created it using the touch command. Okay, that's the size option. Oops. So I can, just like with the minutes, with the mmin command, I can use the minus or the plus, so I can search for files that have that are smaller than a certain size, and I can search for files that are larger than a certain size. So this is often useful if I want to like search for super large files because my file system is getting full, and I want to delete the largest files to make more room. Then I can use plus and then a size. And this the B there, that's going to search for bytes, but I can also search for bytes, kilobytes, megabytes, and gigabytes. So I can look for files of those are different orders of magnitude in size. And if you're not familiar with the different different file size prefixes, then maybe we'll talk about that in a later session. And then the -type option. This, I frankly I don't use this very often. But you can, if you use type F, it's going to search for files. If you use type D, it's going to search for directories. Okay, so this is the next command we're going to talk about, the locate command. Another way to find files and directories in the Linux file system is to use the locate command. So locate works a little bit differently. And I mentioned earlier that I can, it's very easy to use. I can say locate and then the name of the file, and it's gonna find files and directories that match that name, and it's much faster than the find command. So you saw in the find command, sometimes it was kind of slow, especially if I was starting from the root of the file system. It's kind of slow, and that's because the find command is actually searching the file system right there when you do that command. It's looking through, it's iterating, it's recursing through the directories, and it's trying to find that particular file with the properties that you specified. The locate command functions differently. The locate command actually relies on a database. So instead of doing that search when you actually type in the find command, instead of having to take the time to do that search, what the locate command does is it relies on a database that it creates when the operating system is first installed, and then the database is updated, at some fixed period. It's usually daily. So I think the default database update for the locate command, it's going to do a daily update. So so with the locate command, you get the advantage that you're gonna find things very quickly because it's going to do a quick search of this database. It doesn't have to iterate through or recurse through all the directories. But the obvious disadvantage is if the database is only being updated periodically, then you may not find files that were created since the last time the database was updated. So let's try the locate command here. Here I am in my home directory. So I'm going to say locate file 2. Okay, so I got a bunch of results here. And so locate is going to find, it's not only going to find things called file 2, it's going to find file names that have that string of characters in the name. So here I see there's this thing called rake file 2. So it has this thing called file 2 in it. And it found that. There's another thing here called file2.txt, and it found it. There's one here called myco log file, moki log file 2.beam. There's file 2 cable. So this is all the things that have that string in them. If I locate file 3, similar results. I get a bunch of stuff that have file 3 in them. If I look for that, if I search for that file 5, now remember we know that file 5 is there, right? If I say find ~name file 5, it's there. Locate didn't find it. Why didn't locate find it? Because file 5 was created since the database was last updated. So that's a little bit of a disadvantage of the locate command. And we'll talk about how to maybe get around that in a minute. You can use the -i option, just like with the find command. You can do a case insensitive search. You can do the same thing with the -i command. So here -i is going to find things regardless of case. -e so the -e command searches the database for things that it's going to validate that they exist. So remember, the database is going to be updated periodically, and the way the database works is it's appended, but things are not deleted from it. So when files are created, then when the next time the database is updated, the new files are going to get added to it. But when you delete a file, those are not removed from the database. So you can do this search with the -e option, and that's going to, locate with the -e option. That's going to validate that file, if it finds the file in the database, it's going to go check in the file system to make sure that the file is there before it returns the result. And so that's just a better guarantee that file actually exists. So a little bit about the database. Locate command uses a database of files and directories in the Linux file system, whereas the find command actually it actually searches through the file system, which is fairly slow. Database locate command uses to search for the files needs to be updated before it can find the file. Automatically runs the database update once a day, or you can do this manually. So you can use this command called update db, and that's going to update the database. Now, if you're a normal system user with a user account, you can't run the update db command, because update db has to be run by root, and it's automatically run as a root process in the system. Again, the default is on a daily basis. But if I'm a sudo, or if I'm somebody who can use the sudo command, then I can do the update of the database. And as student users on the Virginia Cyber Range, you have sudo access, so you can say sudo update DB, and now the database is going to get updated. And I think this thing is updating in the background. So, oh, I get it updated pretty quick. Okay, so so now when I do the locate file 5 with an updated database, it's going to find what I'm looking for, right? So when I did the locate up here, it didn't find it. I knew it was there because we had just looked at file 5 earlier, so I did find and I found it. But the reason that locate didn't find it is because that database wasn't updated. So now I did sudo update DB, that updates the database, and now I do a locate file 5, and lo and behold, there it is. Okay, so that's locate. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about is the which command. This should be quick discussion because it's used to find the location of commands in Linux. So this is different than just looking for a particular file. This is looking for actual Linux commands, and it is not used to find files that are not Linux commands. And the output of which is the absolute path of the Linux command. And so, the reason you use this is because you might have different versions of a particular Linux utility in your file system, and sometimes you type in that utility and you're not quite sure which version is executing, and so the which command will tell you. So if I say, for example, which ls, it's going to tell me that it's executing the ls command from /bin/ls. Now there may be other versions of ls in the file system, and how might I find those? Well, I could do a locate ls. Ooh, there's lots of ls, yeah, because ls is like embedded in all these different words. Find, let's try this, sudo find, starting in root -name ls. Okay, so there's multiple LSs, user lib mc fish ls, user lib klibc bin ls, and then there's bin ls. So different versions of the list command or the ls command, and so when I type ls at the command line, I don't necessarily know which one of those are being executed. The thing that tells me which one of those is being executed is when I use the which command, and it says this is the one that's it tells me the path to the one that is going to get executed. Okay, and that's it for finding files and directories. So now I encourage students to go ahead and dive into the lab exercise, and teachers, you're going to have to get that lab out of the courseware repository and supply it to your students. So thanks, and we'll talk to you again soon.